So I've got a few issues, topics to sort of discuss with you, gentlemen. First one to Jack. It was recently pointed out in a Forbes article that Esri has successfully ridden the wave of 4 generational shifts in computing. So being that many consider Esri technology to be the platform others innovate on, how do you make sure you stay in step, if not ahead, of that rapidly changing technology trends?
Well, actually, we spend all the money that you guys pay us, actually. That's the simple answer. About 27% of our revenue goes into ongoing R&D. So we run it basically as a non-profit organization. Where does that, this last year we spent $270 million on software development. And that's not new products, it's just you guys all get that in your next release of the product. That's one thing I guess I wanted to say. So we've had
27% goes into R&D.
Yeah.
Wow. Sorry.
I mean, I wouldn't say that we're wealthy. I mean, everybody describes us as a wealthy or rich company, but we're not. We just get it all in and we spend it.
And that's a much higher percentage than a typical software business.
It's about double, 2.5 times. Microsoft is about 11%.
Right.
So so it's not enough to simply do that, spend money. We do it guided by 3 basic directions. One of them is user feedback. And so like these kind of meetings are really important to us. No kidding. We listen and we try to figure out where we have bugs or problems or what really you need in the way of new advances or new workflows or new, faster this, whatever. The second one is we have some really creative people. And they're inventing, they're really innovative. We have 1,100 people in the development team. And some of them actually are located right here in Australia, down in Melbourne. We have labs in China, in Melbourne, in Russia, in Switzerland, and in Edinburgh. But most of it is all done in California. And then the third thing that we're really pretty passionate about is to stay current with the technology. So it's just like, you just have to really have a passion to know what the hell's going on in computing. So we started off in mainframes, and we had to move everything. We had to rewrite all of our software to run in a mini computer. And then we had to rewrite all of our software to run in a Unix workstation. Probably some of you remember that, or FFU remember workstations, I suppose. How you doing? And then the Windows revolution occurred, and everything, technically, we had to rewrite in order to run in the COM C++ environment. So we spent all of our, I mean, it was scary to do this. We spent all of our money to be able to rewrite everything. It was the same algorithms. It was the same concepts. Digital geography remained the same, but it was a big push to do that. And then we had to do the whole thing again when we went into server, and now we're again in the web world or cloud web world. And each of those generation changes, actually the good news is that each of those generation changes, our customer base went up by an order of magnitude. It's really quite interesting.
Yeah.
Except this one is a little different. We're moving from software tools to software tools and SaaS, or software as a service. So we're trying to learn how that really works to provide dial tone of functionality, kind of like what we just heard about, instead of selling products. And so that's changes in the business model, sort of. It's complete re-engineering thinking, but fundamentally it's still digital geography. Does that answer your question? Because I'm not quite sure.
It's a complex, the answer is it's a very complex
thing, but the bottom rule is you just have to be at it constantly, driven by new technologies. You just have to be like a dog hunting for a bird or something, constantly trying to figure out what's going on in the next generation of tools, and then guided by what users need and want, and then what really works.
The answer I heard was 27% of what they do.
Indeed, absolutely.
It isn't enough.
R&D. I mean, there's not I don't think there's a government or another company on the planet that probably can. I don't know how many other companies would actually be able to say that.
There's probably a few, but not much.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Okay, one for you, Martin. So, fascinating talk about the journey you've been on and how you've managed to change so much in the roles you've had in Baltimore and Maryland. really putting sort of location at the highest level of decision-making government. What's the formula? How do you embed that sort of geocentric thinking into these sort of complex sort of government organizations? You know, how do you influence people and the way they interact to change that behavior?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the big variable of leadership. And I've seen mayors in places they'd come and they'd bring their staff to see the city stat room.
Yep.
And they'd want to do a ribbon cutting and say, I've got a room. But it's really not about the room. It's about the method that happens every day in that room. It's about leadership commitment to constantly invite people, if you will, back to the table of democracy, upon which is spread this emerging truth of the map. And so to have every conversation with the map at the center of it was something that we made a discipline out of, that we would do in every meeting. I mean, it wasn't on occasion, let's pull up the map. That became the central organizing platform for all of the various different endeavors, some of them specialized and some of them very unique, but it became the way. And so a leader that realizes the power of that has a tremendous tool to getting people to communicate, coordinate, and cooperate. We used to joke non-consensual acts among non-consensual human beings. But by bringing them back to the map, they start, you layer on, you run plays.
I mean, we have many people in the audience here who are, I guess we heard, challenged with trying to influence their senior management to understand and appreciate what they're doing and to make a difference. Have you seen any particular ways or techniques that, through what you've been doing, by taking some of maybe the prior examples and lifting that to the senior management?
Look, it's about lifting up the stories, and it's about lifting up the leaders.
Right.
And I think if the call of your question is how do people who feel like their leaders aren't seeing the power of this, I think the more that you can lift up the utility of this information in solving real problems. So real stories, solving real problems, and highlighting real leaders who are using it. Bill Bratton, who we were talking about backstage, one of the greatest, savant, he just is very gifted at organizing human beings in common endeavor and seeing these things. But even he was attracted to the story of that subway lieutenant, which was on the front of the New York Times.
Yeah, I have a slightly different answer, observing how you do it, and that is that you have certain information products that you want. You don't give a shit about the technology, but you want performance maps or performance diagrams that really can help you manage.
Right.
And I think a lot of technical people will say, if they only understood the technology, what it could possibly offer.
Right. It's not about the technology.
No, it's about the information products that come out of it. And
that solve the problem.
That solve the problem, but the question is what's needed and wanted. I mean, how do you define the information product? You've got to be, and this is really a message to all of you, is you've got to be on the hunt constantly for what is it that really, where's the pain that executives have, or what's the vision that executives have? I want to run a smart city. I want to have performance measurement, which was what you drove home. And yes, you were attracted to maps too, but that vision of being able to, put the cops in the right place meant that you had to have the kidney maps to be able to do it. And so a lot of people, well, here's my map, and it doesn't have a story attached to it. And the story in your case was a story about making things better, decision support. So I like to suggest, just watching you, that you were very directing to your people.
I wasn't collaborative?
No.
Oh, damn. All this time I thought I was being collaborative.
It was sort of like, what does he want today? You walk in and it's intimidating, and you're demanding. On the other hand, it's... Sorry, really. In my humble view of things,
I got you.
it's this way. But I think aspiring to put the football where it isn't, or aspiring to figure out what's needed and wanted, is very, very important. And that means what kind of maps in the form of information products can drive change that an executive wants to understand. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my view of it. Maybe you could elaborate.
I think what I'm hearing you say is that, look, a lot of the people that are the leaders of your organizations, they actually do have a vision. If you listen for that vision and where they're trying to take things, that vision is actually, if they're elected officials anyway, is a reflection of what they've heard from thousands of people that they had to interact with to get elected. So is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
I mean, if you listen for the vision and listen for where the leader's trying to bring the organization, that should inform you as to what to lift up by way of stories.
And how to tune in the value of what the location platform can do to solve those sorts of challenges.
that may be you.
Don't sell me a solution to a problem I'm not trying to solve.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
What's needed and wanted. I had a.
What's needed and wanted.
What's needed and wanted. I had this. When I was about 25, I met a guy, and he was successful. I can't tell you his name, but I mean, every damn thing he touched, he was successful at it. Finally, I said, I was just a stupid kid. I said, why is it that everything you do is successful? And he said, well, first off, I don't try to be interesting. I try to be interested. And also, you understand what I'm saying? Being interested, being interesting, being cool doesn't get you anywhere because nobody gives a damn about it. But interested people are really interesting. And they take an interest in what's needed and wanted. He says, I don't do what I want. I do what's needed and wanted. And it was sort of like, whoa. He doesn't do things like he doesn't go buy a yacht or be cool. He figures out what's needed and wanted. And if you're a public servant figuring out what's needed and wanted, from an executive like yourself, you're on the hunt for trying to get out. And you have a mind to be able to look at a crowd and understand what's out there. That's a unique, digestible thing. So when working with you, you have a clear vision of what is needed and wanted. You may not even be able to know how to put it together. So I think as a GIS professional, it's be on the search for those information products that really will turn the dial. I mean, remember Joe Biden's thing about he copied what you were doing for the President Obama's
the skills gap thing?
The map that they turned out about the where all the money was going for the recovery.gov. So yeah, we built a map, and this was really Martin's inspiration with working with the vice president, talking with that guy. During the recession, President Obama said, I'm going to really try to stimulate the economy and put a lot of money, and he had congressional support at the time. And he spent $860 billion trying to turn the economy around through capital improvements. It's a lot of money.
And support for schools and other things.
Well, schools were part of it. I mean, it wasn't just capital improvements, but it was capital improvements everywhere. So Martin had this idea of, why don't you take every project that gets money spent on it, and everybody's asking for money, and so put every project as a little dot on the map, and then publish the map as a web map. And there were just tens of thousands of these dots on this map. And everybody was nervous that there was going to be corruption with all of this money going out. And the president asked the inspector general, what you guys would call what do you call it, an accountant, or not an accountant, but one of those checks, auditor, an auditor in charge, the national auditor in charge of this project, so that we would minimize the amount of corruption of all this money going out, because it all had to be spent like in a year or two. So very wisely, they put all these dots on the map, and every dot had a data set behind it that showed who the contractor was, what the project was, and they put that on the web as a web map, and millions of views. Every citizen in America was interacting and playing with that map, and say, oh, this project, that must be the cousin of the mayor, this is, like that. It was, in other words, making every American citizen an auditor.
Yeah, Devaney, the auditor guy, said that he attributed the reason why there was so little waste, fraud, and abuse to the fact that there were 300 million eyeballs
checking
on where it was landed. And Jack makes it sound simpler. Jack made the money usually went through the states. So it wasn't just a matter of creating a national map. It was a matter of a lot of this stuff was block granted to states and then landed on the map. So we had to convince 50 states that it was in their best interest to do this openly and transparently and share all the information. And in the mornings, I would wake up. Jack made the software that he had made available to Maryland available to every state. Once we started doing it, then Pennsylvania did it. Once Pennsylvania and Maryland were doing it, then Pennsylvania and Maryland and Missouri were doing it. And then the next morning, Pennsylvania and Missouri and Maryland and Oregon and Washington State were doing. And it was really very cool to wake up in the morning and to tune into that map and see the map fill in with the shape of the states. And all of us, partly to cover our ass, because the press was out there, we're going to find the waste, fraud, and abuse. But every state did it. It was really remarkable. And we started learning from each other. Like Pennsylvania did a better job of tracking the unemployment benefits and those sorts of things than we did, so we started tracking it that way.
So that's an example of an information product, and it took creativity to think it through and involvement by the senior leaders of our country to think about it, and also the crafting of the stuff behind the scenes. And once that map was out, and again, you did this in Maryland, and we tried to copy it at the national level. Once we saw where the money was going, then Martin started thinking about we need maps, like the red kidney maps. Yeah. So this is where the money is going, but then the press and everybody else wanted to know, well, is it going in the right place? Like the bridges example. So where are there schools having trouble? You showed it at the state level, so we tried at the national level to get some of that same stuff going. Not technically that difficult to do, but it required sort of thinking through what are the information products that are needed and wanted in order to be able to pull this off, in order to avoid the pain of fraud, waste, and abuse, and support the vision of President Obama that we have an open and transparent government. You get the idea?
Yeah, and you know what they said after the reporter, when I was proudly going through what we had done, they said, "Do you do this with your own state capital budget?" I said, "Well, actually, no." And they said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, no real good reason." So we started doing it with our state capital and our operating budgets too.
Yes, that was really interesting.
I just want to finish up on one last point that's been coming through the presentations over the course of the afternoon, and that's around green print. And conservation and global sort of community issues are on everyone's agenda. So I was quite curious to see, I guess, where you see GIS playing such a pivotal component of that in your focus, for your respective areas. Where do you see the whole green print agenda?
You want to go first?
You go first.
Your passion, man.
I'm passionate about it?
Yeah, I'm passionate about it too.
I think you are.
Who wants to go first?
You go first.
All right. I'll go first by quoting Jack, who said that, look, we've got to move beyond our passion for being, our instinct for conservation to becoming master gardeners of this entire planet. I mean, our footprint as a species has just grown so exponentially on the planet. We have to be a lot more mindful and cognizant and intentional about our planning of our continued existence in generational terms. And that's going to require us taking stock of, mapping, and protecting the other living systems that exist on this planet. And so to see what Jack's done with Greenprint, he did it for us in Maryland. In fact, we were the 8th, I joke, we were the 8th client in Maryland back in 1972. 1972.
One of my first customers. We wasn't even born yet, but I was there.
I was in second grade then. I carried my class for 1970 for George McGovern, which was not easy in an Irish Catholic class in that year. But 1972, so we were the 8th client. We were client. Maryland was the first state to dedicate our transfer tax. Whenever there's a real estate transaction, we dedicated that to the preservation of open space, which led people in those days to say, well, hell's bells, how are we going to track where the land is that we're tracking? Right. That led them to Jack. We were client 008, which tells you that Esri at their outset only expected they would have 999 clients ever.
That's good.
And now they have more.
He's very proud of this, actually. I can see it. I'm going to remember this, Martin.
So that green print thing, which we kind of helped pioneer, I mean, it's phenomenal to see Jack doing this for the entire nation. And I think we need to do it for the entire globe. So there's your setup. Yep. Green print.
Okay, so our federal government did not do this, much to my chagrin. I'm a landscape architect, so my passion, even when I was back in school at Harvard, is my thought that we could build a national GIS and do suitability mapping and conserve nature. Never happened. So I built the tools, did these projects, try to consult people, build an SDI, then you'd be able to do this great stuff. Never happened. Really just pisses me off to no end. So about 4 years ago, my wife Laura, who's my co-partner in this company, we decided just to fund this ourselves. So we spent about $8 million just taking government data sets and putting it all together in a cloud and standing it up with a design tool, a geo-design tool, so that people could actually design their own little green infrastructure for their own little area. But we would have it coming in from the cloud. It's all inside of ArcGIS Online. You're welcome to look at it. It's all free. And do it. There's a lot of things in what I'm saying that I want to communicate. One is, we were unable as a nation, even with leaders like President Obama, to really bring all of the different parts of geographic information together so that we could actually go about consciously planning our future with respect to green infrastructure.
But with having these tools, I mean, there actually are mechanisms set up under President Obama. Yeah. He has signed executive orders to encourage all of his departments to use the financing tools in place so that in the event, for example, if the Army Corps of Engineers has to build a levee to protect a city, and in the course of building that levee, they wipe out 100 acres of wetlands, they're required by federal law to go upstream and figure out how to restore the ecological value of those wetlands at another place in that river shed. And increasingly, private capital is figuring out, aha, if I have a tool like the green print, and I can move upstream and see scientifically that restoring these wetlands, oftentimes they've been, like filled in as bad agricultural land because nature wants to make them
polluted, ruined.
Yeah, so if I can restore these 100 acres upstream, I could make that investment now. I can legitimately, under the federal regimen, here's the scheme, get repaid a decent rate of return on that. You can see where that can become a wise investment, not just for philanthropy, but for the corpus of a nonprofit or even for a pension fund.
Green infrastructure should be just dial tone. And public agencies should be able to use it. Private companies should be able to use it. These restorers of nature should be able to use it. We should have green infrastructure dial tone that just comes right into our screen, and we're making better plans.
And this is where it is.
And this is where
this is how you can go upstream and restore these and protect them.
Exactly.
And mayors and cities throughout the United States are all under consent decrees, you know, that tells them thou shalt build giant new stormwater receptacle things underground. And a lot of them are saying, wait a minute, time out, man. What if we made our alleys more porous? So they could absorb the water.
Green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure.
Right. Basically. What if we put in the green infrastructure instead?
Yeah.
What if we put sensors in the green and the gray that could prove to you that actually it has this better value
and with climate change, there's going to be all kinds of let's build the wall to protect Miami from the floods.
Right. Industrial solutions.
Gray infrastructure. I was just there last week. Build the wall. That's what we're going to do, protect Miami Beach, as opposed to green infrastructure or, you know, context sorts of things. So this definition of green infrastructure, I'll just challenge you, whereas the United States was never able to get their act together in terms of getting all the agencies to get all their data. Why doesn't Australia get it together? You know, not be stupid like we were, and get all your geographic data together so that you have a foundation for creating, you know, integrating. Not to say that you guys aren't really beautifully designing cities and protecting some of the most important areas, but you could, I'll just say, I couldn't say that you do, I don't want to say that, I shouldn't say they could do that.
But you're going to say
I should maybe shut my mouth and just say, as GIS professionals, team, collaborate, integrate data, get approaches which are collaborative that supports green infrastructure protection in Australia, because, I mean, this is it. It's disappearing fast, here as well as elsewhere.
Collaboration is the new competition.
Oh, did you just pull that out?
That's a bit deep.
That's good.
On that note, I'm going to close
Thank you, guys.
the session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.